Discipline and Punish is a seminal work by French philosopher and historian Michel Foucault, proposing a profound re-evaluation of the mechanisms of punishment and social control throughout history. Originally published in 1975, the book traces a historical analysis of the penal system from public spectacles of corporal punishment to the modern institution of the prison. Foucault questions the foundations of disciplinary power, which, rather than relying on violent examples of executions and torture, molds itself into a logic of surveillance and normalization of individuals. The work not only denounces the transformations of the punitive system, but also reflects on how contemporary society has internalized subtle forms of control and discipline. By examining the transition from brutal methods of punishment to a civilized administration permeated with surveillance, Foucault urges readers to rethink concepts such as freedom, power, and subjectivity itself. Foucault begins the narrative by revisiting times when the body was the focal point of punitive spectacle. The book opens with an account of the execution of Robert-François Damiens, whose public punishment highlights the violence and almost ritualistic nature of medieval and pre-modern punishments. This episode serves as a starting point to demonstrate the historical transition. While power in the past manifested itself spectacularly and violently, modernity exercises it more subtly, rooted in the constant surveillance of individuals. As the narrative progresses, the author describes how society began favoring control methods that did not rely on overt physical brutality. With the advent of modern society, punishment became internalized through discipline. Institutions such as schools, hospitals, factories, and especially prisons began functioning as mechanisms of normalization, producing docile and obedient bodies. Foucault uses the metaphor of the Panopticon, conceived by Jeremy Bentham, to illustrate the new surveillance paradigm, a structure in which the observer, even if invisible, maintains a constant presence that induces self-regulation in individuals. The author details how this process of disciplinarization was incorporated into various social spheres. The penal system, initially fixated on visibility and terror, was replaced by procedures aimed at reintegrating the condemned into social life. However, this reintegration occurred under the condition of conformity to pre-established norms, imposing a routine of surveillance and control that extended beyond the confines of incarceration. Throughout the book, Foucault discusses the transformation of the gaze and punishment. Punishment, once a spectacle to reaffirm sovereign power, becomes an instrument of psychological and social control. The transition, marked by the imposition of rules and constant inspection of behaviors, reveals a new logic of power that installs itself diffusely and capillarily, where all spaces become potential sites of discipline. Another central point is the analysis of modern institutions and their relationship with the production of knowledge power. Foucault argues that knowledge, constructed through practices of observation and record-keeping, legitimizes and perpetuates relations of domination. This production of knowledge enabled the creation of techniques and procedures aimed at shaping individual and collective behaviors, transforming the penal system into a mechanism operating in both juridical and social realms. In summary, Foucault's account outlines the evolution of punitive power, emphasizing that the change occurred not only in the form of punishment, but also in its functions and effects on the modern subject. Each chapter unfolds into a meticulous analysis of historical transformations and the philosophical implications of social control, proposing a critical lens on how contemporary societies have internalized surveillance practices. Foucault's critical approach in Discipline and Punish is undoubtedly one of his most significant contributions. The author demonstrates mastery in articulating critiques of modern institutions and revealing contradictions within the apparent civilization of the penal system. His analysis goes beyond historical events to delve into the essence of power, illustrating how surveillance practices are intimately tied to the production of subjects and social conformation. One of the work's strengths lies in Foucault's ability to connect historical narrative events to profound theoretical reflections. For example, the transition from corporal punishment to institutionalized discipline is presented not merely as a methodological shift, but as a reconfiguration of the very concept of punishment and society. In this sense, the author underscores that mechanisms of power did not vanish with modernization. They were simply restructured and internalized. However, the theoretical density and analytical methodology of Foucault may pose a challenge to readers unfamiliar with philosophical and historical debates. The author demands interpretive effort to unravel complex concepts such as knowledge power and the logic of the Panopticon. This complexity, however, is also seen as a richness, enabling multifaceted readings and opening pathways to multiple interpretations of modes of social control. Regarding writing style, Foucault employs a dense and erudite prose, interwoven with with detailed descriptions of historical episodes and theoretical analyses. This style requires attentive and reflective reading, which may appeal to academics but act as a barrier for general audiences. The argumentative clarity, however, compensates for this density, allowing concepts to be grounded and social critique to become evident throughout the narrative. The work also stands out for its capacity to provoke reflections on the mechanisms of control permeating modern societies. By demonstrating that institutions, far from being neutral structures, are imbued with power relations, Foucault challenges readers to rethink their own experiences of surveillance and discipline in daily life. This critical approach is amplified by the emphasis on the psychological effects of surveillance and how control extends beyond the prison environment, influencing schools, hospitals, and other spheres of social life. Formally, Discipline and Punish is characterized by a clear division into chapters that, though often overlapping in themes and reflections, allow a gradual and in-depth exploration of the subject. Each section of the book works interconnectedly, moving from emblematic historical events to the elaboration of theories on the workings of power and discipline. Aesthetically, the work is marked by an erudite and analytical writing style, where methodological rigor combines with a narrative that reconstructs the contours of the past in near-pictorial detail. This fusion of theoretical analysis and historical description creates an immersive effect, enabling readers to visualize the environments in which surveillance and punishment processes unfolded. The alternation between historical accounts and abstract reflections strengthens the argumentation and highlights the continuity between a violent past and an ostensibly civilized modernity. The events recounted, from public executions to the institutionalization of prisons, are approached with a critical gaze that unveils the contradictions inherent to power systems. Foucault shows that, although society adopted less ostentatious forms of punishment, control, and oppression, remained present in subtler, more insidious ways. This dichotomy between the spectacle of ancient punishment and the invisibility of modern control is one of the author's central theses, permeating the entire work and influencing both the argument's structure and its impact on readers. By grounding his critique in historical and theoretical evidence, Foucault demonstrates how transformations in punitive techniques influence the very constitution of society. The analysis of the Panopticon, for instance, reveals not just an architectural model, but a powerful metaphor for the functioning of surveillance mechanisms in contemporary society. This analogy becomes a methodological tool linking form, the structure of surveillance space, to content, the process of internalizing power, enriching the reading with a critical dimension that transcends time and space. In summary, Discipline and Punish does not merely describe a historical evolution of punitive practices, it seeks to demonstrate how these practices are intrinsically tied to the formation and maintenance of power structures. Foucault's articulation of narrative events with theoretical concepts not only intensifies the analysis, but also expands understanding of the ethical and political implications of a system that, under the guise of modernity, continues to exert near absolute control over individuals. Michel Foucault's work stands as essential reading for those seeking to understand the complexity of power mechanisms and the subtleties of social control. By demonstrating the transition from a model of spectacular punishment to diffuse discipline, the author not only highlights the evolution of control systems, but also underscores the danger of normalization and incessant surveillance embedded in modern institutions. With dense and erudite prose, Discipline and Punish challenges readers to abandon the illusions of progress accompanying modernity and recognize the lingering, often hidden traces of oppression. Foucault's critique moves beyond mere historical documentation, inviting deep reflection on the nature of power and how we become unwitting collaborators in systems that surveil us. This review aims to reflect the richness and complexity of the work, emphasizing key events and critical elements that compose Foucault's reasoning. The book's impact lies in its ability to reveal that even in a society deemed evolved and rational, mechanisms of discipline and control continually reinvent themselves, insidiously and permanently shaping subjectivity and social structures. Thus, Discipline and Punish remains a landmark in debates on power and society, offering a penetrating gaze into the ways modernity, under the pretext of humanization and rationalization, imprisons individuals in a web of surveillance that transcends time and historical contexts, remaining as relevant today as at its publication.